In 1924, 3 years after her abortion, Porter became pregnant again by yet another Latin lover. And although she decided to carry this baby to term, the child, a boy, was born dead. During the pregnancy and its depressing aftermath, Porter wrote more stories related to her fruitless experiences with motherhood. She completed and published Virgin Violetta, a story about disillusionment and the conflict between spiritual love and physical ardor, and it includes an acerbic portrait of Salomon de la Selva. She also drafted The Fig Tree, in which her autobiographical character Miranda buries a dead baby chick that she mistakenly fears she has buried alive, a metaphor for abortion. At the same time, Porter wrote almost all the stories she called holiday, based on a desperate trip she made during her marriage to Kuntz to stay a month with the extended Hillendahl family near Houston while she recuperated from surgical removal of an ovarian cyst. The story finally became an allegory of women who live outside their natural role of procreation. The unnamed narrator of the story arrives at the Mueller farm, which oozes fertility at the interstice between late winter and early spring, and witnesses representative cyclical rituals of the Mueller women, Hatzi's wedding, Gretchen's giving birth, and Mother Mueller's death. Only one woman stands outside their circle, Ottilie, the crippled, mute servant girl, who draws the narrator to her dingy, bitter-smelling little room to show her a photograph of the child she had been before a debilitating disease made her what she is. When the narrator scrutinizes the photograph, she suddenly sees the resemblance to the rest of the Mueller family and knows that Ottilie is a Mueller daughter, just as surely as Hatzi and Gretchen are. Identifying with the ostracized, barren Ottilie, the narrator says her life and mine were kin. That is almost as much as we know about the narrator, who has come to the farm seeking silence and escape from troubles too painful to name. When we look at the story still further through the lens of Porter's life, we also can read into it Porter's acknowledgement that she is different from other women, that physical traumas and losses she endured have made her, like Ottilie, an outcast from the community of women. In 1925, Porter was working on St. Martin's Summer, later retitled The Cracked Looking Glass, which discloses the ways she was finding compensation for her failure to succeed at motherhood. Rosaline, a childless, aging Irish beauty, married to an ailing older man, displaces her grief over her missing or dead male child or children, first in her devotion to young men who stay at her house as boarders or hired hands, and second in the improbable tales she tells, sometimes based on dreams she has had. She justifies a whopper she has told an itinerant salesman by declaring, "He wanted a story, so I gave him a good one." Rosaline is thus a kind of artist, and her foiled motherhood finds sublimation in the creativity of art. It is the earliest example of Porter's contention that art can supplant maternity. In 1926, Porter received her most crushing blow when she contracted gonorrhea from a short-time summer lover and was forced to undergo surgical removal of both ovaries, a then risky operation that rendered her sterile at the age of 36. She linked the operation to the death of her niece, Mary Alice Holloway. It was 7 years between that sorrow and this, she wrote in private notes, acknowledging the finality of those two events that had been, she believed, beyond her control, but omitting mention of her lost babies of 1921 and 1924, both of whom she knew had been victims of her own carelessness. Porter's stories that followed her operation in the 1920s were increasingly sober statements about marriage, motherhood, and childlessness. He, published in 1927, is the story of a woman who also gives up a child, this one a mentally handicapped son, who is finally banished to the county home. Magic, published in 1928, is, among other things, an allegory of marriage, in which a woman prostitutes herself in exchange for economic security that allows neither self-respect nor childbearing. Rope, published in 1928, is about a childless marriage and the power of hate in it. The Jilting of Granny Weatherall, published in 1929, reveals the final hours of Ellen Weatherall, who had a good marriage and became an excellent mother despite the betrayal of an earlier fiancé. In Theft, the protagonist comes to accept responsibility for all her losses, both material and spiritual, after the janitor steals her treasured but empty gold lame purse, a Freudian metaphor for a vacant womb. In Flowering Judas, published in 1930, Laura denies love to the children she teaches, rejects romance, represses her sexuality, and embraces a revolution that practices death instead of life. After a jailed revolutionist dies by taking all at once the drugs she brought for his comfort, she is horrified to think she has become a life negator instead of a life engenderer, in the ultimate repudiation of her female self. From 1930 through 1962, Porter created numerous fictional portraits of both successful and unsuccessful mothers, while she tried marriage 2 final times and refined her feelings about the relationship between maternity and art. That tree includes a poet's idealized memory of his mother, who inspired his art, while his puritanical wife denigrates it. Hacienda presents Doña Julia, who has abandoned her natural role as nurturer and procreator in a modern world of decadence, corruption, and death. Noon Wine includes 2 mothers, pious, unenlightened Ellie Thompson and Olaf Helton's revered old mother in South Dakota, to whom he sends money that ultimately provides a trail for a bounty hunter to track him down in Texas. The Miranda cycle, all of which was written in the late 1920s and 1930s, consists of Old Mortality, Pale Horse, Pale Rider, and the 7-sectioned The Old Order, in which grandmother Sophia Jane Ray Gay, based on Katherine Anne Porter, is presented in all her maternal glory, alongside another commendable mother, her freed slave Nanny.